Right, this is the second of two. It's actually episode 4, but it's the second episode of the actual coroner's report. Mm. Um, Episode 4, the coroner's report into Christopher Rolliston's tractor accident. Okay, so now I've got to be careful with. I've got 3 keyboards going on here because I've got a laptop here as well. So get the right mouse. um, so as I said in the previous one, in episode 3, this is episode 4. I'm going to start reading the actual coroner's report now, and I'm moving one mouse around, thinking it'll be on this screen, but actually I'm trying to find something on another screen over here to my left. So Daryl Keith Halford's statement. He's a farmhand who works for Orowara Trust on Orowara Station. So I've said here, type notation on the side of the document is as follows. This is stamped on it by the JP. I hereby certify that this deposition was taken before me on oath at Takapau on the 19th of March 1953. I couldn't read his signature, but it's there. And he calls himself Justice of the Peace, 19th of March 1953. Right. So I'll try and move this over a bit so that I'm not looking so far away from you. So anyway, Daryl Keith Halford, duly sworn Seth. I am a farm employee working at Orowara Sheep Station, Takapau. The body that is now lying at the Orowara Station is that of my late employer, Sydney Christopher Rolliston. Stop, Dennis. I have to presume that when he says Orowara Station, he actually means Orowara Homestead, because he would have been very often that he would get inside Orowara Homestead, but that's where the body would have been, because they're all together. You know, where you got to consider where these people would all meet. You know, the JP of the JP is important to all this. The policeman, the doctor, the Rollistons, Christopher's wife, Darren Halford, all these people have gathered together. Good chance. So I thought there would be as many as 10 people. So I'll read it again. I'm a farm employee working at Orowara Sheep Station, Takapau. The body that is now lying at Orowara Station is that of my late employer, Sydney Christopher Rolliston. And everybody called him Christopher. I last saw the deceased alive at 8 o'clock this morning, 19th of March, 1953, when he was filling a tractor with benzene. It is a Ferguson tractor, wheel type. What he means by that is one of those ones with big rubber wheels on the back and small rubber wheels on the front, right? So it's not a track-mounted tractor. He then left shortly afterwards on the tractor to go to the back of the station to instruct the fences working, where a new fence had to go. The deceased had been managing the station for the last 2.5 years. Shortly before 11 a.m, as I was driving another tractor on a public road through the station property, I was returning shortly. This writing is a bit stilted because, as I had said in the earlier one, this is being dictated to somebody who's not a great typist, and that's maybe a JP or the policeman. Shortly before 11 a.m, I was driving another tractor on a public road running through the station property. I was returning to the station to get a load of mature for an aerial top-dressing aircraft which was working on the station. The aircraft circled low over the tractor, and the pilot waved to me, and the pilot landed in the paddock near the road. And then I've changed the colour of this, and I've said, and it's the same thing. As a result of what the pilot told me, we went to a paddock about half a mile from the road, and I there saw the Ferguson tractor overturned and the deceased pinned underneath. And then in another colour, the left-hand side wheel of the tractor was resting on the deceased's chest. I saw that he was already dead. His face and head did not appear to be injured. The tractor had completely rolled over and had come to rest on its side against a wire fence. The road the deceased had been following was a clay track. At the scene of the accident, the road was very even and there was no apparent reason for the tractor to overturn. The fence was about 9 feet from the track with a bank between the road and the fence. The only explanation for the tractor running off the road is that the deceased was probably watching the aircraft working overhead. Probably. Speculation, you see. As soon as I saw the deceased was dead, I notified the police and the doctor at Takapau. He would have to do that by phone from the homestead. Not many phones around in those days. It was necessary to cut the wire in the fence to allow the tractor to roll a little further so the body could be released. I would say that the accident happened within half an hour of the time the deceased was found. The deceased was a married man, 29 years of age. Now, I made a couple of notes about all this here, and so I need to, I probably just need to read them. Christopher was like, Halford is very clear in this statement that Christopher was lying on his back with the tractor on his chest and his face is visible. Halford, the farm worker, is doing the speculating to explain the cause of the accident, and that includes his assessment of the accident site, including such things as the distance from the road and then the state of the road. He also offers an explanation for the tractor leaving the road. I have to move this so as I can read it. He also offers an explanation for the tractor leaving the road. So we can assume that the theory that Christopher crashed off the road because he was watching a plane overhead belongs to Halford. So it seems that the JP who signed this document as a witness included that speculation in the statement. So further down here, I've said, then Halford goes on to speculate about the time of death. When the next statement shows that a doctor was present at the accident site. It seems to me there is an abdication of responsibility to the person at the bottom of the pecking order. And so I talked about this before, and that is because those, the good and sort of respectable people would not be seen to be making up a lie in front of lesser people, but they might be prepared to go along with the lie. Do you know what I mean? There's a certain stigma associated with generating a lie. There's a different one associated with repeating it, because there's a sort of plausible deniability. So that's signed by D.K. Halford. Why was Halford taking I'm asking questions here. Why was Halford taking manure back to the plane when he has already said that the plane was operating from another farm? Well, he didn't say it, I don't think, but in fact the pilot did say it. Was he returning to the neighbour's airstrip, or is there a mistake here? You see, there's something quite wrong. He says that the tractor had completely rolled over and had come to rest on its side against a wire fence. He also says there was only 9 feet between the road, presumably the edge of the road, and the fence. And we have to realise that a Ferguson tractor is about 5 feet tall and 4 foot 6 inches or so wide at the back wheels, and a complete rollover to end on its side would need at least 14 feet. But he says there's only 9 feet between the edge of the road. I am of the feeling that the tractor would be at least half its width off the road before the slope would cause it to roll over. So we have 2 foot 6 inches, and then on its side and then sliding. So 5 foot 6 inches equals 8 feet, and upside down another 4 feet, at least equals 12 feet, and back onto its side to hit the fence, another 5 feet. So we've used up 17 feet when Halford says there's only 9 feet between the road and the fence. So I've said here, further notes to the above. I take this apart word for word and line for line, right? And so I'm up to 9 minutes, and so I'm only going to get through this one statement on this one. It was written and signed on the date of Christopher's death, the 19th of March 1953. That's important. So this is written in the homestead, in the trauma associated with Christopher dying. So the one thing we do know is that Christopher's dead and he's at the homestead. And his family are there, the doctor's there, the policeman's there, there's a whole range of people there, including the JP who signed this off, whose name I can't decipher. First, I want to talk about the role of the top-dressing pilot and his plane in this incident, right? Note well, my internet inquiries reveal that a top-dressing with a light aircraft like a Tiger Moth would preferably be done early in the day because that is when there is the least wind. And that is for two reasons. One, preventing material from blowing to places it wasn't intended for, and the safety of the aircraft and the pilot flying at low levels. Just makes sense. There's also significant hill country on Orawara Station where normal top dressing cannot be done with a tractor. So we should assume they were top dressing the hill country. Important and relevant information I've said here. In March 1953, the aerial top dressing industry was in its infancy, and in fact in 1952, in that entire year, less than 100,000 acres were top dressed by plane in the entire country. There aren't even any figures for before 1950. Orawara, it's a brand new thing. Orawara Station on its own is 2,500 acres or 3,000 acres or something. By comparison, in 1964, 6 million, nearly 7 million acres were top dressed by plane. That means that in early 1953, Orawara Station would have been among the first large land holdings in the country to be top dressed by plane. It was a complete mystery to most people and looked seriously dangerous. I also seriously wonder why, when an aerial top dressing is such a new thing to be doing and so groundbreaking and experimental and potentially dangerous, that the manager of this farm, Christopher Rollison, wasn't on site keeping an eye on how this was going rather than driving past in a tractor to spend 2 hours with some fencing contractors. It is difficult to believe he would do that. Surely he would be watching to assess the viability of top dressing by plane. Other observations from the statement I've said here. The farmhand Halford, who made this deposition, says that he saw Christopher Rollison, his boss, putting benzene, petrol, in a tractor just before 8 a.m. and that he left shortly after that to go to see the fences at the back of the farm. That encounter with Halford would likely have been in the farm service buildings over by Orangi Road or up by the stables close to the homestead where a tractor might have been kept. We have to ask where bulk fertilizer was kept. So they're keeping the bulk fertilizer on the farm because Halford is delivering it to the plane where the plane's taking off from, and the pilot says that's on another farm. And Halford's job that day was keeping the plane supplied with fertilizer. Yep, he mentions driving the tractor back with a load of mature for the plane. We have to note that elsewhere somebody, maybe the top dressing pilot, says the plane was operating off another property. I need to go back and check that as well as a note to self. I am surprised that Christopher is this late because he is the farm manager, and because given the fact that we are told that he is going out the back of the station to instruct fencers about where to put a fence, he should have wanted to be on site at 7:30 a.m. when contractors traditionally turn up to start a job. But he's still mucking about refueling a tractor in the yard as late as 8:15 a.m. This means he is also ignoring the fact that he is expecting a top dressing plane to arrive. And Halford was clearly tasked to work with the top dressing plane that day, because he says in a statement that he was returning to the station to pick up another load of fertilizer when the plane he was working with landed in a paddock by the road to alert him to what had happened. The other thing, of course, is that he's carrying the fertilizer for the plane, and all the plane had to do was go back to the original takeoff site, and he would be there. Why would the plane All the plane had to do was wait another couple of minutes and land in a place where it was safe, rather than landing on a farm somewhere, landing in a paddock. All the plane had to do was wait where they were doing the exchange anyway, and a couple of minutes later Halford would arrive with the next load of stuff and he could tell them then. Somebody hasn't thought this through. So the pilot said in Halford's statement to have circled low over Halford and then landed the plane in a paddock inside of Halford. And Halford was on a tractor on the road, right? Presumably towing a trailer carrying bagged fertiliser. And he says that the pilot landed the plane in a paddock, and he talked to the pilot. Here's that sentence from a statement. As a result of what the pilot told me, we went to a paddock about half a mile from the road, and there I saw the Ferguson tractor overturned and the deceased pinned underneath. He says clearly we went to the site of the accident, and so we went to the site of the accident. Who is we? Because it implies that the other person was the pilot. Because both of these people were potentially on their own on their respective machines. Then Halford reverts to I and continues with no further mention of the pilot or what he did or didn't do. I think this is people getting mixed up trying to create convincing detail around a false story. Think about the pilot for a moment. He could not leave the plane's engine running and shout a message to Halford because it would have been too loud. And further to that, he would not want to leave the plane's engine running while they walked to the accident site. So to accompany Halford to the accident site, he would have had to switch the engine off, which meant starting it again later. Unfasten seatbelts, get out of the plane, walk to the fence, climb the fence, explain the problem to Halford, make a collective decision to go to the site of the accident, and then presumably both men climb on the tractor to ride up that farm road to the scene of the accident. But did they go together, or did Halford misspeak on this statement? Was he misquoted by the person doing the typing? Because if he and the pilot did go to the accident site together, we would expect a statement from the pilot as well. Because he would be the second person to cite it and a very important witness. And of course, he did make a statement to the newspaper that was published on the day of the accident. And we have that as well. And it does not mention his going to the site of the accident. So the alternative was that he gave that message to Halford and returned to the plane, because perhaps we have to presume that he left the engine ticking over without chocks. It gets weird. The other thing about all this, of course, is that the first public indication of this was a statement from the pilot that there'd been an accident. So, if you think about that, once they'd first generated the story and the pilot was in the room with them, because he would be, and so they would, somebody would be pushing. He would be saying, look, I've got to go and talk to the newspapers about this, or something like that. And so the people in the room would say, well, tell them this. You know what I mean? They've included, one way or the other, if the pilot is included in the story, and so Irie and Halford's generated that. So just to say before I forget, I've said here, I imagine they might not have even had purpose-built machines to load the planes back then. So why would they? It's brand new industry. So Halford would be bringing the fertiliser back in sacks or bags to load it into the tiger moth hopper by hand. And about here, we have to remember they also said the plane was operating from a neighbourhood property. So why was Halford delivering manure from wherever he was collecting it to a paddock deep into the Orowara farm? Surely he should have been going to the neighbour's farm. You understand? And this, when as a farm manager, Christopher also has a state-of-the-art, groundbreaking top-dressing project going on. That pilot would have taken off from Waipakorau or Bridge Bar at dawn, 7:30. So he'd already been busy on site by 8:30 a.m. Because, it's 7:30 is dawn. When Christopher was still refueling the tractor and preparing to drive to the fences. The newspaper says that the plane was taking off from a neighbouring property, but Halford didn't mention that, And if we think about that, it means that they didn't consider any of the paddocks on Orowara suitable. If the paddock was suitable, why weren't they loading the fertiliser there? I would think that Christopher would also feel the need to pay a visit to the neighbour whose property he was using, but instead his plan was to help the fencing contractors. Seriously? Actual sunrise back then in March was 7:15 a.m. So back to the tractor. There are a couple of places where tractors and benzene would be kept on Orowara Station, and one of them would have been the farm buildings on the other side of Aorangi Road, and they are still there, quite close to the intersection with Orowara Road. Another is the coach house or stables at the homestead, but I don't believe Mrs. Rolliston would want farm workers coming and going all day. It doesn't sort of make sense. So for Christopher, who lived with his wife and child in the homestead apartment above the ballroom, that would mean 900-metre walk through at least 3 farm gates to get to the farm service buildings over by that intersection, or maybe he would take the car, whereas a horse would have been kept stable at the homestead 120 metres from the back door of the homestead. Horse is more convenient. I'm not sure why he was going to instruct the fences. He wouldn't he just saddle up a horse? Maybe he had all the wire and posts and staples and things stored in the service buildings, and that's going to take them up on the tractor tray. But wouldn't that be more reasonable for him to organise earlier, or instruct a staff member to do it? They need the fences would have been there at 7:30, and if he was supplying all the materials, it needed to be on site at 7:30. And I've said that already. It is also reasonable to assume that while the top dressing is going on, Christopher was up there with the fences for as long as 2 hours, when he would really be expecting him to be on the ground, keeping an eye on the dangerous. When we should really be expecting him to be on the ground, keeping an eye on the dangerous and exciting business of aerial top dressing. So accepting the story for what it is, that time space suggests Christopher is returning from a fencing project when the accident happened, rather than going up. Because, speculation. And if the top dressing had been going on for long enough for this witness to be returning to the station, farm buildings, to get another load of manure, Christopher would have already had lots of time to look at the top dressing plan working on any of the back paddocks. Someone also said it was only the second flight, so maybe they started late. Why would they be needing more supplies after only one flight? Ferguson would bring back either easy enough for 2 loads. I do wonder why Christopher would take the tractor rather than a horse. A horse would be easier and more in keeping, it seems to me, but okay, so he took the tractor. So shortly before 11 a.m, Halford was driving on a public road back to the station, which would have meant Aorangi Road back to the station service buildings close to Orowara Road. And he says the plane circled low over him and waved and then landed in an adjacent paddock. The thing about that is that a tiger moth with good and experienced pilot needs up to 250 metres flat to land, with no obstacles on his approach, and a bit more to get off the ground again, and the land out ahead of where he takes off, and the land out ahead of where he takes off needs to be clear of trees and power lines. Why would he take the risk of landing in a paddock that he had landed in before, when all he had to do is go and land and wait for Halford to turn up again? I mean, it's sort of beggars belief, but it's a great sort of romantic story. Knowing the area as I look at the Google, and it's not a great big area, so nothing takes very long. Knowing the area, and as I look at Google Earth, there's not much space on Aorangi Road that fills those requirements, that is, for landing. And he might just have to buzz a paddock to move stock off to the side. I have to assume that the most suitable would be the paddock on the corner of Orowara Road and Aorangi Road, which is the one out front of the homestead. That's a good, big, open, flat paddock. Power lines around, though. It also is only a few hundred metres from the homestead and the phone, and to those service buildings. Halford stops the tractor and makes his way to the plane, or do he and the pilot meet in the middle, and the pilot explains that there has been an accident and where. Halford then says in a statement that we went to a place half a mile from the public road to find a body pinned under a tractor. I have to assume that they both rode Halford's tractor back to the accident site. The pilot says he saw the Ferguson tractor overturned with the deceased pinned underneath it. By now it's 11:15 a.m. Halford, in a statement, says three distinct things here. The left-hand side wheel of the tractor was resting on the deceased's chest. 2. I saw that he was already dead. His face and the head. 3. His face and head did not appear to be injured. The first and third of those sentences says Christopher was lying on his back, face up. The pattern of speech makes it clear to me that the justice of the priest is prompting Halford with questions and taking dictation, and neither he nor either he or someone else is doing the typing. I will say again, Christopher is lying on his back because the tractor is lying on his chest, and Halford can see his face. It's unequivocal. He says that, and that is indisputable. Halford's statement then moves on to the tractor. The tractor had completely rolled over and come to rest on its side against a wire fence. Remember, the tractor has had to do that in its own length, 9 feet, 2 2.3 meters. Not very, can't be done. Then Halford jumps to the road in the statement. Then Halford jumps to the road in the statement. Perhaps the JP or the typist is getting impatient. There's this, to be repeated in the policeman's statement. The road the deceased was following while driving the tractor was a clay track. This is a crucial statement. At the scene of the accident, the road was very even and there was no apparent reason for the tractor to overturn. This is also repeated by the policeman in his statement. The fence is about 9 feet from the track with a bank between the road and the fence. 9 feet again. A bank. It's a slope. It's not a cliff. It's a slope. It's a slope that results from bulldozing a road, right? And that's about yay. And then it's always the same because of gravity. You bulldoze some earth, it ends up with a slope about that. And then there's this. Someone had to have an explanation for why and how this accident can happen, and it comes from Halford again, when he says the only explanation for the tractor running off the road is that the deceased was probably watching the aircraft working overseas. So Halford, the farm worker, the man at the bottom of the pecking order, I'll say this again, is being left to determine the cause of the accident that killed his boss, who just happens to be a former tank commander who served in Germany in 1944 and 1945 and therefore experienced with heavy machinery in surviving extreme danger. Halford didn't assume that he was going too fast, lost traction on clay, driver fainted, animal ran in front of him, got something in his eye. I'm going to have to comment on this later in the document. Halford goes on to say, as soon as I saw this, there's a typo there, not mine, it was in the thing, the deceased was dead, I notified the police. As soon as I saw the deceased was dead, I notified the police and doctor at Takapau. Now to do that, he had to leave the scene of the accident and make his way to a telephone, and telephones were thin on the ground in 1953. But there would have been one at the homestead, and that was the site of all authority in his life, because most likely he was living in one of the station houses. That meant telling the residents at the homestead, and they would be Christopher's mother, Agnes Rolliston, the most powerful lady in the district, and his father, and his wife, Jennifer, not to mention servants, that Christopher was dead out on the farm under a tractor. That would have caused huge distress, and I'm surprised he never mentioned any of that anguish and distress in his statement. Think about it. He goes on to say it was necessary to cut the wire in the fence to allow the tractor to roll a little further so the body could be released. That means he would have had to find some wire cutters. Don't try cut a piece of number 8 wire with your fingernails. And presumably they would be in the service buildings, which means coming back to the homestead. Or the fences would have some. So you've got to go find the fences to cut the wire. I would say that the accident happened within a half an hour. So this is Halford's words. I would say that the accident happened within half an hour of the time the deceased was found. He finished off with, the deceased is a married man, 29 years of age. Right, so I want to note here that something similar to Halford's version of the city, reproduced below, including the addition of the pilot's name, had reached the press in Napier. I need to do this more carefully. I want to note here, because this will be the end of this thing, this particular episode, that something similar to Halford's version of the story, reproduced below, including the addition of the pilot's name, had reached the press in Napier in time to be published on the same day of the accident. I have the clipping here. It is available online. And here's my reproduction of it word for word. Headline, pilot sees machine overturned. Landing in a nearby paddock, subheadline. Subheadline, New Zealand Press Association, Hastings, March 19th. A top-dressing pilot, Mr. A. Ingram, of Hastings, who saw a tractor lying on its side with a man pinned beneath it, landed on the well-known Takapau station Orowara this morning, Aruwawhare, and found that the driver of the tractor had been killed. The man killed was Sydney Christopher Rolliston, 29, married with one child, of Takapau. Mr. Rolliston was driving the tractor along a farm track when it plunged down a hill and struck a fence. Mr. Rolliston was pinned beneath the machine. Mr. Ingram, who was a top-dressing part of Orowara Station, was flying off a landing strip on a neighbouring property. This is... On the early flight, he saw Mr. Rolliston driving his tractor along the farm track. On the second flight, he saw Mr. Rolliston's tractor had overturned and that Mr. Rolliston was lying beneath it. He immediately landed in a nearby paddock. Mr. Rolliston was a member of the family which farmed Orowara for 4 generations. Of this newspaper report, I have to say the following. It specifically says that the pilot found the driver of the tractor was dead, and he fails to say we to include Halford in that. He also says that the plane was flying off an airstrip on another property, and Halford's statement says that he is supplying the plane with fertiliser, manure. One man calls it manure. Does this mean that Halford was actually working at the airstrip on another farm? Was he on his way back there to meet the plane there? Surely the pilot would just land in the usual place, knowing Halford would only be minutes away because he saw him driving back from the air. Surely it would be safer and easier to tell Halford when he arrived back that something was amiss. Right, you can go back and check some of this. I'm up to 32 minutes, which is not what I wanted to do. But, that's the way it works out sometimes. And I'm going to do the doctor's statement in the next episode.